constituents who have come to me, and I have immediately thought, this is a big injustice. So it was literally me sitting in my sitting room, midnight, on the phone to the Foreign Secretary on one phone, and on another phone, on the phone to my caseworker who works with me in Parliament, and he was on the phone to the families at the same time.
Any shout outs in particular of people that were?
Well, Theresa May, for instance. I think AI represents huge opportunity, but we've also got to be careful. It's similar to the internet and social media. We have extremities of wealth and of poverty.
I'd like to start by taking you back, perhaps to when you were a bit younger. And if you can remember, perhaps you can talk about your earliest political memory.
Yes, well, that's interesting. I was brought up in the north of Scotland. The constituency is called Banff and Buchan, and it's a very marginal seat historically.
An apt name.
Very apt name, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Although an awful lot of people who come from that area have my surname. But it's a marginal constituency. It's actually a Conservative SNP seat. And I remember, because it's so marginal, the TV cameras would always come to a small town in the middle of nowhere in Scotland. So I really remember the TV cameras more than anything.
In a way, I guess it's prepared you somewhat well for the current seat that you hold that's also a little marginal. So I would like to talk about your career in corporate finance, because between that memory, studying law at Oxford, and becoming elected in 2019 for the Kensington constituency, you had an extensive career in finance, JP Morgan, Bank of America, and you spent time in both the City of London and on Wall Street in New York. How did those two environments compare?
Well, I think having a banking background is actually very beneficial in Parliament. I think it's very important to be numerate. We've got lots of lawyers in Parliament who are very articulate.
You've got both backgrounds.
Yes, that's very true. But it is very important because we are spending taxpayers' money and we need to get value for money. And it's very interesting in the department. My civil servants always say, you immediately focus in on the numbers. So I think that is a very important skill to have. In terms of London versus New York, I've got to say I didn't see a huge difference in terms of the banking climate. People work very hard, and certainly I always tried to do absolutely the right thing for my clients.
Are there examples are there things that you think they do better in the States that we could incorporate here in the city more, or vice versa?
Actually, I think London is very strong, in particular for its innovation. If you think about a lot of the banking innovations, the swap market, for instance, that I was very heavily involved, that really came from the London market.
And you went on from JP Morgan to Bank of America. Yes. And you ran the debt capital markets division, specializing in Europe. So I imagine you had a lot of experience with the European companies, understanding how they were structured, their finances, their governance. Similar question, is there anything that you learned specifically from those companies that you saw that you think set examples that we might want to follow, that British companies might want to follow, or examples that as a legislator you might want to think about integrating certain aspects of how the system works there to best grow the UK economy and in particular the City of London?
Yes, I was very privileged because I covered the large companies throughout Europe. So I really did see best practice.
What sort of companies?
So, for instance, in Germany, I covered Deutsche Telekom, which is the large telecom company. I covered RWE, BMW, Siemens. So really top class companies. So I did see best practice. We can always learn from best practice. And one thing that I'm very focused on when it comes to the UK economy is improving productivity, because productivity has slipped under COVID, in particular in the public sector, and we need to increase that productivity.
One thing that, going back a little bit to the United States, one thing that you might have had a sense of working in New York is the spirit and ethos of the American dream, the idea that anyone from any background can accomplish anything if they work hard enough. To what extent, in what ways can we cultivate that same spirit here, perhaps to a larger extent to help grow our economy, maybe not just in the city, but more generally, that attitude and that ethos?
Well, I think that is very much so my background. I went to a comprehensive school in the north of Scotland, and not a top performing comprehensive school also, but I was able to get into Oxford University. So I'm a great believer, one, in education, and that is a real platform for everyone to succeed, and also hard work. You know, you look at Andy Murray, he didn't win Wimbledon without getting up very early in the morning and training every day.
And it took him a long time, right?
Absolutely.
And was it 2013, I think or was it 2016? Because I think
remember,
he won the
actually.
Olympics and Wimbledon.
Oh, that's right. But I was very privileged to see him play at Wimbledon on a number of occasions.
That's a great one to watch.
Yes.
So I mentioned I was recently speaking to one of your colleagues. We did an interview who also came from a background in finance. And whilst that presented him with many advantages in terms of understanding commerce and how commerce fits in with politics, one area that he was at a slight disadvantage in was navigating the political structures and systems, getting things done. And he found that some of his colleagues in Parliament who might not have had corporate backgrounds, financial backgrounds, who were career politicians or came up, rose through the ranks within the various parties, had a lot more of a well-formed idea of how to get things through. How have you found the transition from finance to politics, and how have you been able to do incredibly well in this sphere in such a short period of time?
Well, one thing that struck me when I first came to Parliament is how helpful other MPs are. You think that they're going to be crazily competitive, but actually people really did help those of us who were newbies. That's what we called ourselves.
Any shout-outs in particular of people that were...
Well, Theresa May, for instance, I remember asking her about, am I going into the right voting lobby the first few days? And so people are very, very helpful. The other thing that struck me about Parliament was how egalitarian it is. So the Speaker will call you, even if you've only been in Parliament for 5 days, in the same way as he would call a former Prime Minister like Theresa May. And the reason
level playing field.
It is a complete level,
exactly the same.
and there is a very good reason for that, because we all represent a constituency. So all constituencies need to be treated equally.
That is a fantastic segue onto your constituency of Kensington. To give people a bit of background, previously a Conservative safe seat up until 2017, it swung to Labour. Emma Dent-Coad was elected with a majority of 20. And then in 2019, you dethroned Emma and you won with a majority of 150, so still quite a slim majority. And your constituency, Kensington, is, I would say, very well known, both nationally and internationally. When you think about Notting Hill, you think about South Kensington with the museums. 3 out of the top 10 museums in the country are in South Kensington. 11 million people, around 11 million people visit those on an annual basis. In your own words, could you talk a little bit about the assets, benefits, opportunities of what Kensington has to offer?
Well, every MP says that they represent the best constituency, but I actually think it's true in my case. It is a wonderful constituency. It's got all of the high-profile museums, the Royal Palace. It's got Portobello Road, Goulburn Road.
Do you spend much time on Portobello Road, or where do you like to spend time in the constituency?
Yes, I spend an awful lot of time in North Kensington. One thing about the seat is that it has huge divergence and diversity, but we have extremities of wealth and of poverty.
It's one of the most, I believe it's the most socioeconomically divided borough in the country, and perhaps even if you look globally, it will be one of the biggest areas of wealth disparity. And also from an ethnic perspective, it's also quite divided. So that brings me on very nicely. What are the challenges associated with Kensington that it faces?
Well, I think the diversity of Kensington is a great asset, and we have so many different diasporas all the way through the constituency, from South Kensington up to North Kensington. But yes, there are big inequalities in Kensington, and that's one thing that I'm very, very focused on narrowing. And it's not only economic, there are also big health inequalities, for instance. Now, going back to education, we're very lucky that we have excellent schools. And so if you look at the number of good or outstanding schools that we have in Kensington, we're way above the national average. So that gives people the platform that they can have success.
So what are from the perspective of a representative, what are some of the challenges? So you've spoken about the challenges to do with the borough, that the borough faces. What are the challenges in representing such a diverse group of people? And what are some of the issues perhaps that are important to those constituents that you have very much front and center, and both in your electoral, but both in terms of how you choose to legislate, but also with the election in mind?
Well, it does mean that you've got to be across a very wide range of issues. And Kensington is also a very international constituency. So whenever there is a major event in the world, the Kensington MP tends to be involved.
Got a lot of embassies as well, so that kind of creates a bit of a melting pot sometimes.
Yes, no question. So for instance, in Afghanistan, when we had the evacuation of citizens, I was very, very heavily involved. And I got 2 large families onto the last plane, and we were able to achieve that.
How did you do that specifically?
So we had been in touch with these families. It was slightly complicated because in both cases, they did not all have British passports, but they were family units. And so we were taking out those with British passports. So I had to get on to the then Foreign Secretary and say, you have to make an exception and take the entire families out. And I said, we've got to get them onto the last plane. So it was literally me sitting in my sitting room, midnight, on the phone to the Foreign Secretary on one phone, and on another phone, on the phone to my caseworker who works with me in Parliament, and he was on the phone to the families at the same time, because we were having to navigate them through Kabul.
That's incredible. That must have been quite the operation.
It was, yes.
To fulfill that.
But these are almost life and death matters.
I can imagine.
I really thought that was one of the most powerful things that I've been able to achieve here.
So I would like to come on to the Homes for Ukraine and the Afghan resettlement in a bit. I wanted to first ask about another constituency issue is youth clubs. And of course, Kensington faces some challenges that we talked about. And one of the really amazing assets that we have in Kensington is the Harrow Club.
I love the Harrow Club.
So perhaps you could, and this is a club that encourages young people to come together, be involved in the community, give them, I guess, an equity stake in society, being really involved, and prevent them from going off on the wrong track. Perhaps you could talk a little bit briefly about the Harrow Club and then some of the government support for initiatives like that and why that's important.
Well, the Harrow Club is a great institution and I visited them a lot. In fact, it was one of the first visits that I did as an MP. And so I cannot talk highly enough about their work. But I want to say that it's not only the Harrow Club. There are lots of great youth clubs in the constituency. Just a few days ago, I was at Youth Action Alliance, which is just off Warnington Road. Very, very impressive what they do. And if you look at the clubs in the constituency, they are catering for 4-year-olds all the way up to 18-year-olds. So before I became the MP, I actually volunteered at Rugby Portobello Trust. And I was one of the people who did the homework club. Now, I only volunteer.
So how popular were you among the sort of 0 to 10 demographic?
Yes.
At least they can't vote, right?
Yes. Well, I've got to admit that I only volunteered for the primary side, not the secondary side, because I thought maybe the maths would be a bit challenging.
Well, once they get older, I'm sure they'll appreciate that. So you might have a loyal electorate in that regard. You've been in the press on a number of occasions relating to support that you've given constituents on the issues of Windrush and NHS injustices. So two very sensitive issues and important issues considering what's just been happening with for example, the infected blood scandal and Windrush more generally. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about those and how you went about galvanizing support for those particular issues.
Well, often people approach their MP when they've exhausted all other options. And so they come to their MP as a last resort. And I have had several instances of constituents who have come to me and I have immediately thought, this is a big injustice. Some of the cases are very, very complicated. We spend an awful lot of time on them. So we've got a few cases ongoing at the moment, which I have been involved in for 2 or 3 years. But we do a number of things. Obviously, I go to the relevant government minister. That could well be the Secretary of State for the department. Sometimes we're working with our embassies abroad. Again, coming back to the fact that Kensington is a very international constituency.
What sort of issues would you work with an embassy? Is that, for example, Windrush? What are the constituency issues where that might come up?
We've been involved with embassies when people have been imprisoned abroad, and we think that there has been a miscarriage of justice abroad. And then what I have also done is I've had a debate in Parliament. So on the NHS injustice, I led a debate in Parliament on that.
So I'd like to come on now to your role as a housing minister.
Yes.
And you were appointed, you were the Exchequer Secretary to the Treasury,
That's
if I'm
right.
getting this right.
Yes.
I feel like there are quite a few Treasury positions, so it's always getting that right. And then you were made the Undersecretary of State for Housing and Homelessness in 2022, and you still hold that position. What is the process in terms of the nuts and the bolts when you're given a ministerial position, getting to know that position, all that involves?
Well, that's a very good question, because you turn up in the department, you don't necessarily know your brief incredibly well.
Is it intimidating? Is it like getting a new job, essentially? Because it's sort of a job within a job, right?
But what is unique is that you are expected to function at a very high level from the moment that you turn up. So, for instance, when I moved from Treasury to housing, I was called in front of the Select Committee within a couple of days. And so the Select Committee are lots of very experienced MPs grilling you. And I presented on behalf of the department within a few days. But one thing I would say is that we get very, very good support from our civil servants.
So you, as part of this role, have been very active in the Homes for Ukraine scheme. So you have helped to relocate around 200,000 refugees from Ukraine. You've also participated in resettlement from Hong Kong and Afghanistan. I'd like to take Ukraine to begin with. And what have some of the challenges involved with that resettlement been, and what are some of the initiatives that you're most proud of, or what are some of the aspects of that initiative that you're most proud of?
Well, I think that the scheme has been a phenomenal success. And I'm not saying that because I'm the minister responsible. Really, who should get the gratitude for it is the British public, because the British public have welcomed almost 200,000 Ukrainians into their homes. And often people are still sponsoring Ukrainians after 2 years. It's quite phenomenal. And so I'm very, very proud of that. And I'm also very fortunate in having the Ukrainian community in Kensington. So Holland Park, the embassy, the consulate, the cultural centre, the community centre, the school is all in Holland Park. So very, very happy to have those people. And I'm very privileged that I can now call many of them friends.
I guess that's a really nice thing to, put politics aside, it's a very nice thing on a personal level that you've been able to cultivate those relationships with these people. On the Hong Kong front, a lot was made a few years ago of the crackdown on Hong Kong from the government and the extension, the sort of the hand that the British government gave to people who wanted to relocate. Perhaps you could talk about that relocation, and also in the context, Hong Kong's another financial hub, and the aim is to attract skilled people as well. Perhaps you could talk about that in the context of what that adds to the economy and the potential advantages that those skilled workers can bring to Britain.
Absolutely. So we have welcomed again almost 200,000 Hong Kongers. They have settled very, very quickly and very easily into the UK, which I'm very happy about that. And we estimate that they will contribute a huge amount of value to the UK economy. But essentially, we have done the right thing. There was, as you say, and there continues to be, a crackdown in Hong Kong. So we absolutely have done the right thing in welcoming Hong Kongers to this country.
The other area, in addition to that, the other area that you specialize in is homelessness.
Yes.
And all countries face issue with homelessness and rough sleeping. Now, while in the UK homelessness has proven to be a bit more of a challenge, there has been significant progress to reduce rough sleeping.
Yes.
Perhaps you could talk about that progress, and perhaps in a also a more international context. We see other countries, for example, in parts of the state, San Francisco, there are big issues with rough sleeping and homelessness. Drawing on the knowledge that you've accumulated in your department and programs that have worked, if you had to give a piece of advice to those in California to try and help that issue that's ongoing, what would that advice be?
So I've got a very strong view that you have to prevent rough sleeping and homelessness before it actually occurs. So I have spent a lot of time working cross-government. So I work with the Ministry of Justice in terms of prison leavers. I work with the Department of Education in terms of care leavers. I work with my counterpart in the Health Department in terms of hospital discharges. We need to make sure that no one leaves public institutions onto the streets, and that is very important. But yes, you're right that globally our rough sleeping numbers are very low on a per capita basis. But I've got a very strong view that every one rough sleeper is one too many. So government did publish a strategy to end rough sleeping for good, and that continues to be my mission.
So that is one of a number of accomplishments that you have made as a member of Parliament. What would you say you're most proud of, either on a constituency level or a ministerial level, as part of the role that you've carried out?
Well, we've talked about Homes for Ukraine, and I'm very proud of that. From a constituency perspective, I've mentioned what we did with those Afghan families. I also got a government investment in the Lancaster West estate, where Grenfell Tower is, of £20 million. And that was to decarbonise the estate and make it a modern 21st century estate. I also, while a backbencher, I took forward a private members bill to insist that all new homes have EV chargers, and that was adopted by government. Representing a central London seat, air quality is so important to my constituents, so I'm very proud of that.
That's something you've been quite vocal on. What, briefly, because we don't have too much time left, what are the challenges associated with the rollout? That seems like a really great initiative. What are some of the other challenges? Perhaps it's a public-private sector, public-private sector discussion. What do either the public or the private realm need to do to roll out EV infrastructure in greater capacity?
Well, I think it's very important that EV chargers are interoperable, so that a bit like a cash point, that you can use any bank card, that you can use every single EV charger. And I think that we need to ensure...
So ease of use is a very important thing. It's not just having the number, it's the access to them, which is...
Yes, I think that is very important. And you don't want to have to queue for 2 hours to charge your car. So I think ease of use and customer experience are very, very important.
So finally, what I would like to talk about on the subject of futuristic matters, I guess one could consider electric vehicles futuristic, as artificial intelligence. And that is something that my generation, as we are growing up, we are starting to use it a lot more and more. Having just come from university, a lot of people use ChatGPT on
their essays.
No, hopefully more to summarize things than actually write essays. As a legislator, what do you think the awareness is, both with you but also your colleagues, as to the implications of AI, use cases, benefits, and potential dangers?
I think it is high in the UK Parliament. So our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has been at the forefront of AI.
He hosted the summit last year.
Precisely, yes. In Bletchley Park, yes. And
Michelle... He got Elon Musk to attend.
Yes, precisely. Yeah. And Michelle Donnellan, the Science Minister, has also been very heavily involved. I think AI represents huge opportunity, but we've also got to be careful. It's similar to the internet and social media. Huge opportunity, but it can have issues, and we need to be alert to those.
To finish on a positive note, with respect to AI, what are you most excited about?
I think it's going to be very, very powerful in health diagnostics. And I really think that we need to leverage the technology.
Cutting waiting times for the NHS, making sure that people get accurate diagnostics,
it's accurate assessments. Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. Felicity, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.